On October 7, 2023, a large-scale Hamas offensive on Israeli territory began. In a matter of hours, the militants advanced 45 to 50 kilometers deep into Israeli territory, capturing dozens of settlements, as well as checkpoints and military bases, killing hundreds of people and capturing dozens of soldiers and civilians. The Israeli army was caught off guard just like 50 years ago during the Yom Kippur War. In response, the Israeli government announced the beginning of a large-scale mobilization and stated that it would solve the problem of the Gaza Strip once and for all. October 10, 2023. Fighting in the south of Israel has been raging for the third day. The most active battles are in the north. The Palestinians continue to concentrate forces near Ashkelon in order to strike at it and take the city, or finally surround it. In neighboring Sderot, active fighting continues for every street, but the IDF troops managed to gradually squeeze the militants out of the city. Ofakim and Netivol finally came under Israeli control. IDF soldiers cleared them out and tried to develop an offensive against neighboring kibbutzim. To the south in the Eshkol area was the same situation. The militants were gradually squeezed out of the settlements, but they did not retreat and did not give up. The Hamas members regrouped and again tried to attack the police and the Israeli army. Anyway, by the end of the day, the leadership of the Israel Defense Forces announced that control over the border with the Gaza Strip had been restored. According to them, not a single militant was able to cross the border over the last day. The military laid mines near gaps in the fence. At the same time, the IDF command also noted that mobile militant groups are still operating in the territory controlled by Israel. Thus, the Israelis managed only to close the gaps and cut off the militants, but not to clear all the previously captured territory from them. In general, the cleanup continued, as did the concentration of forces. On the 10th, the 1st battalions and brigades from central Israel have already begun to pull up to the front. Columns of dozens of tanks and armored personnel carriers appeared on the roads, as well as on the border. Israel has begun preparing for a full-scale invasion in Gaza Strip. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said, "Hamas wanted change in Gaza. The situation will change 180 degrees. They will regret this moment. Gaza will never be the same." This statement sounded particularly harsh against the background of the ongoing mobilization, which has expanded. Now the government has announced that it will mobilize 360,000 people. In addition, the Israeli Air Force sent planes to Europe to transfer hundreds of Israeli troops from there so that they could participate in operation against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Nevertheless, the fighting took place not only in the Gaza Strip. According to various reports, on the same day, the IDF launched an assault on the city of Nablus on the west bank of the Jordan River, as well as Bethlehem. There were also reports of the beginning of fighting in the area of the refugee camp in Jenin. Artillery duels continued further north on the Lebanese border. The Israel Defense Forces reported that about 15 rockets were fired from Lebanon. The air defense system intercepted 10 missiles fell in an open area. The Israel Defense Forces, in response to rocket fire from Lebanon, hit 2 Hezbollah observation posts with tanks. On the same day, a number of important political statements were made. The coordinator for strategic communications at the U.S. National Security Council, John Kirby, indicated that America is not going to send troops to Israel. However, U.S. President Joe Biden said that Washington is ready to send additional military forces to the Middle East if necessary. Most likely, they will be located in countries near Israel. Currently, about 30,000 American troops are stationed in the region. He also promised to soon consider in Congress the issue of allocating additional funds to Israel. In response, a number of Muslim groups including Hezbollah and the Houthis, as well as Iran, threatened the United States with a direct military response if they intervened in the fighting in the Gaza Strip. Nevertheless, Russia and Turkey opposed the escalation of the conflict. Both countries called for a ceasefire and the resumption of negotiations. At the same time, they emphasized that a long-term peaceful settlement of the Middle East crisis is possible solely on the basis of the two-state formula approved by the UN Security Council, which provides for the creation of an independent Palestinian state within the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. The next day passed without incidents. The IDF continued to sweep the border villages and build up forces. The militants, in turn, continued to attack Sderot and Ashkelon. Both sides focused on firing at each other. Also, the exchange of artillery and rocket attacks continued in the area of the Lebanese and Syrian borders. The main information reasons were the revelations of the military and intelligence, which explained the success of the Hamas attack. For senior Israeli security officials told the New York Times that the Palestinian invasion succeeded due to a series of security failures. First, intelligence officials could not control the key communication channels used by Hamas. At the same time, they could jam the phones of the leaders of the movement, who in their conversations claimed that they were not preparing an attack due to a lack of funds for this. Secondly, the militants managed to disable the equipment for monitoring the border, on which all border units depended. And thirdly, most of the IDF commanders in the area were concentrated on one base, which was captured at the initial stage of the invasion. Thus, almost the entire group in the Gaza Strip was beheaded and deprived of communication with the rest of the armed forces. In addition, during the sweep of the militants, they found accurate maps of the area with aerial photographs of settlements, the designation of military units, the approximate number of personnel, their weapons, as well as detailed instructions on how to combat enemy equipment. At the same time, Israeli intelligence officials noted that shortly before the attack, Hamas warned border guards about a suspicious surge of activity in the militants' communication channels, but no one took this message into account. By October 12, the main forces of the militants were finally squeezed into the borders of the Gaza Strip. Nevertheless, some militant groups still continued to operate on the ground. The sides, in turn, focused on mutual shelling. Hamas sent rockets to Ashkelon and Sderot, while the Israeli Air Force continued to bombard the Gaza Strip. The next day, October 13, the exchange of rocket and bomb attacks continued. The militants fired about 200 rockets at Ashkelon and Sderot. Israel responded with another large-scale air raid. Thus, the Gaza Strip has been firing daily at Israel for a week, firing hundreds of rockets at each enemy city, which indicates a long preparation by Hamas for this conflict and a large-scale accumulation of resources. On the ground, the fighting has moved to the border of the Gaza Strip. The IDF managed to increase its forces and finally take control of the perimeter of the sector. Now the tightening of people and equipment continues. There is an increased concentration of armored units in the vicinity of Sderot, which, together with official Israeli statements, indicates preparations for a large-scale ground operation. Thus, the Ministry of Defense and the government called on residents of the Gaza Strip to evacuate to the south within 24 hours. Hamas, in turn, urged the population to ignore the evacuation warnings, calling them propaganda and psychological warfare. On the same day, U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin visited Israel and met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Gallant. After the meeting, the United States changed its attitude to the conflict and declared its readiness to deploy the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit near the borders of Israel to use it in the release of American hostages. Now the unit is on board the amphibious assault ship USS Bataan, which participated in exercises in Kuwait. Earlier, Washington stressed that it was not going to transfer its military to Gaza. I also draw your attention to the fact that the Marine Corps is, as it were, the personal army of the President of the United States, and Biden does not need the approval of the nation and Congress to use it. A personal order from the President himself is enough. Hezbollah and a number of Arab groups said, in response, that the ground operation in the Gaza Strip and the U.S. invasion would lead to irreparable consequences and a large-scale attack on Israel. Russia, in turn, called on all parties to negotiate, ceasefire and release the hostages, since a ground operation in the Gaza Strip would entail absolutely unacceptable losses among the civilian population. Moscow believes that the only way out of the current conflict will be the creation of an independent Palestinian state with East Jerusalem as its capital. However, both sides refuse to negotiate and continue to stand their ground. At the moment, both sides have suffered massive losses during the conflict. Israel lost 1,300 people killed, including 220 soldiers and 45 policemen. There are more than 3,400 wounded, as well as 130 to 150 hostages. Palestinian casualties in the Gaza Strip amount to more than 1,500 killed, including 583 children and 381 women. The IDF found approximately 1,000 dead militants in the combat zone. More than 6,200 people were injured. Thus, one of our forecasts was confirmed. The militants failed to build on their success due to the deployment of Israeli mobilization and the pulling of troops to the border with the Gaza Strip. The IDF, in turn, was able to close the ring around the sector and begin preparations for a military invasion, which will begin in the next day. At the first stage, Israel will conduct a large-scale bombing of the sector, and then throw its brigades into battle, but it is necessary to take into account the extensive network of Hamas bunkers and bunkers under the Gaza Strip, where the militants can wait out the bombing. Therefore, a ground operation can turn into a military catastrophe similar to the invasion of Afghanistan or the attack on Mogadishu. We will talk more about the plans for the invasion of the Gaza Strip in the next video. In the meantime, put likes, write comments, and subscribe to the channel to understand the brutal politics.